Welcome everyone to another episode of Archetype Review. In this episode we'll be looking at the Volcanic Archetype. Volcanics made their debut back in 2007 with the release of Force of the Breaker. Their monsters are all composed of the Fire attribute and Pyrotype, and due to a huge shortage of Pyrotype archetypes, they are still to this day considered one of the better Pyro archetypes of the game. Volcanics revolve primarily around their Blaze Accelerator support cards to essentially sacrifice themselves in order to wipe out cards in your opponent's side of the field and seriously mess them up. Some of them also have effects that sacrifice your battle phase or attacking for the turn to use these aforementioned effects, while others also cause some burn damage, which is definitely a minor perk as well. The archetype was pretty solid when it came out, but quickly fell into the abyss. That is, until around 2015, when out of nowhere the archetype saw an instant resurgence due to the release of one key support card. Alright, let's take a look. We'll start with the first three: Volcanic Rat, Volcanic Shell, and Volcanic Scattershot. Volcanic Rat is the most basic of basics for this archetype. It's a fire level 1 pyro monster with 500 attack and defense, and it's a vanilla monster, so I'm just mentioning it here because it is technically a part of the Volcanic archetype. It's just never ever gonna see play, and there's many reasons why, but I really don't have to explain that. Volcanic Shell, on the other hand, is another fire pyro level 1 monster with 100 attack and 0 defense, and its effect says once per turn you can pay 500 life points, add one Volcanic Shell from your deck to your hand. This card must be in the graveyard to activate and to resolve this effect. It's actually one of the more widely used Volcanic cards despite its really horrible stats, because you're mainly not ever going to be using this card for its stats, but really just for its effect. You see, this is one of the few cards in the archetype that actually has a lot of viability with its Blaze Accelerator cards, which we'll get into in just a little bit. Just know that paying 500 life points to search for a card is not a bad effect at all. It's actually pretty good. And the fact that this effect triggers from the graveyard, hey, it's actually one of the earlier good graveyard effects in the game. The really good thing about this effect too though is the fact that it's not a hard once per turn, it's a soft once per turn, which means if you get another copy of it into the graveyard, you can then use that effect on the same turn as the first shell. So overall, yeah, pretty good. And Volcanic Scattershot is a fire level 2 pyro with 500 attack and 0 defense, and the effect says if this card is sent to the graveyard, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. If this card is sent to the graveyard by the effect of a Blaze Accelerator card, you can send 2 Volcanic Scattershots from your hand and or deck to the graveyard to destroy all monsters your opponent controls. This is perhaps the best target in the entire archetype for the Blaze Accelerator cards because it has multiple effects here. First of all, the small burn damage actually can add up over time if you keep recycling this card, as 500 damage per and 1500 per 3 is actually not bad at all. You see, this effect does not have a hard once per turn at all, which means you could recycle this if you use cards like Royal Firestorm Guards. Overall deck thinning by essentially destroying all monsters your opponent controls, inflicting 1500 damage, and also getting the effect off from Blaze Accelerator, which I'll get into in a little bit, that is actually a really good combo and play extender. Yeah, so definitely a 3 of and never any less. Speaking of Blaze Accelerator cards, let's take a look at their 3 different versions. We have Blaze Accelerator, Tri-Blaze Accelerator, and Blaze Accelerator Reload. The first one is a continuous spell card that says you can target one monster your opponent controls, send one Pyro-type monster with 500 or less attack from your hand to the graveyard, and if you do, destroy that target. You cannot declare an attack the turn you activate this effect. It was okay, I suppose, back in 07 when it came out, but it was never really that great. Essentially locking you out from actually doing damage during the battle phase, as well as some very mediocre destruction and not even any burn. Yeah, it's a little unfortunate and underpowered. Tri-Blaze Accelerator though says activate only by sending one face-up Blaze Accelerator on your side of the field to the graveyard. You can send one Pyro-type monster from your hand to the graveyard to destroy one monster opponent controls and inflict 500 damage to your opponent, but you cannot declare an attack during this turn if you do. Technically it is an upgrade, but it's hardly an upgrade. First of all, the activation requirement means that you must run the original Blaze Accelerator card. That's already a little bit unfortunate because that means you have to be running both of these, which is just a little too cloggy. The upgrades from this card compared to the first one is actually that you don't have to use a monster with 500 or less attack. It can be any Pyro-type monster, and you also inflict a little bit of burn damage. So yes, it's an upgrade, but not exactly ideal. Blaze Accelerator Reload, however, this is the one I was talking about that was the primary card that basically gave the archetype a resurgence in 2015. So it's a continuous trap card that says this card's name becomes Tri-Blaze Accelerator while in the spell and trap zone. During either player's main phase, you can send one Volcanic card from your hand to the graveyard, and if you do, draw one card. You can only use this effect of Blaze Accelerator Reload once per turn. During either player's main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard. Send one Volcanic card from your deck to the graveyard. First of all, it can be used during the opponent's turn, as it says during either player's main phase, just making it a quick effect in a way. You can then send any Volcanic card, even though most of the time they'll just be sending Shell or Scattershot. And on top of getting all those great effects from Scattershot, you also get to draw a card. So yes, if you send, let's say, Scattershot from the graveyard effect of this card, that card is still being sent by a quote Blaze Accelerator card, which means the effects will still go off. The one and only downside is the fact that it has no hard once per turn, but that's very understandable because the effect actually is really powerful. So this is obvious that it is a definite 3 of. Let's move on to 3 more of their monsters, the first one being Volcanic Blaster, followed by Volcanic Counter, and Volcanic Rocket. Volcanic Blaster is a fire level 3 pyro monster with 1200 attack and 600 defense. The effect says when this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard by battle, you can place one Volcanic monster in your deck on top of your deck. Counter is a fire level 3 pyro monster with 300 attack and 1300 defense. The effect reads, when you take battle damage while this card is in your graveyard, banish it from your graveyard, then if there is a fire monster other than Volcanic Counter in your graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the amount of battle damage you took. And Rocket is a fire level 4 pyro monster with 1900 attack and 1400 defense. The effect says when this card is summoned, you can add one Blaze Accelerator card from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So going back to Blaster, it's very mediocre to say the least. It's not an effective search as it only puts the card on top of your deck, but to be perfectly honest, if you are looking for specifically a Volcanic card searcher, this is going to be your ideal card, despite how slow and stupid it actually is. If the card was actually sent into your hand, that would be a lot better, but unfortunately it's not. And the worst part is that that effect would not have been overpowered or broken by any means in 2007, as the effect still only goes off from being destroyed by battle. So it was already balanced around the fact that it must be a battle floating effect. So they really messed up with this one, and that's a little unfortunate. Counter's actually pretty solid. Some of the most modern Volcanic decks still do run at least one copy of this card, because it can be pretty useful. It can sometimes make your opponent think twice about actually attacking with a strong monster, because they are going to be taking a lot of burn damage as well. And if their life points are really low, in a way this actually prevents the opponent from attacking because they can no longer attack anymore. The one downside is that the effect is actually mandatory, so if your opponent is actually smart and they have a weak monster and a strong monster, they should attack with the weak monster because you're forced to use the effect, and thus they will only take a little bit of burn damage. So if the effect was actually optional, it would be a much better card, and that's really just some wording issues there that happen. And lastly, Rocket. So Rocket is by far the best Volcanic card aside from maybe Scattershot. There's many different reasons as to why, but first of all, remember that this card came out in 2007. A not once per turn, any kind of summon, meaning normal or special summon, search any one Blaze Accelerator card on a 1900 beat stick. This is a card that feels like it was released around 2011 or 2012, but it was actually released 4 to 5 years before that. Yeah, by far one of the best searchers back when it first came out, and still a really good searcher. 3 for sure, and never any less. Moving on to the next tier, we have Volcanic Slicer, Volcanic Hammerer, and Volcanic Queen. Slicer is a fire level 4 pyro monster with 1800 attack and 1200 defense. The effect says, once per turn you can inflict 500 damage to your opponent. If you activate this effect, this card cannot attack during this turn. Hammerer is a level 5 pyro monster with 2400 attack and 1500 defense. The effect reads, once per turn, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to the number of Volcanic monsters in your graveyard times 200. If you activate this effect, this card cannot attack during this turn. And Queen is a fire level 6 pyro monster with 2500 attack and 1200 defense. The effect reads, this card cannot be normal summon or set. This card can only be special summoned from your hand to your opponent's side of the field by attributing one monster your opponent controls. If you special summon this card, you cannot normal summon or set this turn. Once per turn, you can send one other card you control to the graveyard to inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. During your end phase, either tribute one other monster or take 1000 damage. Slicer and Hammer are both very mediocre cards. At least Slicer is a decent 1800 beat stick back in 2007, but only inflicting 500 damage and sacrificing your ability to attack with this card, that's not very good. Hammer is even worse, as it's a tribute monster, and you have to have at least 3 Volcanic cards in your graveyard, which, to be honest, is not that difficult to achieve in order for this card to do more burn damage than Slicer. Regardless, though, because it is a level 5 monster requiring a tribute, you would have to find ways to creatively special summon it, which can be a huge problem. And Queen, while Queen is not bad, it's not great because there are other monsters, such as all the other kaijus, that just do this effect, but much better. The card is sometimes seen in some side deck options as it does inflict some burn damage to the opponent per turn, but the other downside about this card is the fact that the burn damage comes on the end phase of the controller. You see, if it was during the standby phase like Lava Golem, it would be naturally better, because if you give it to your opponent, you're pretty much guaranteed 1000 burn damage upon their turn, because then they'll use the card as material or something for their main phase 1. But if it's the end phase, more than likely they're going to be using the card before the end phase comes around, so it's kinda useless. And really the only purpose is to tribute opponents' monsters that have battle protection, or any kind of destruction or targeting protection. So again, if you want to run those kinds of monsters, run cards like Kaijus, those are much better. And now we're going to get to their boss monster, Volcanic Doomfire. It's a fire level 8 pyro monster with 3000 attack and 1800 defense. The effect says this card cannot be normal summon or set. This card can only be special summoned by sending a face-up Tri-Blaze Accelerator you control to the graveyard. During your opponent's battle phase, your opponent must attack this monster with any attack position monsters they control. When this card destroys a monster and sends it to the graveyard, destroy all monsters your opponent controls and inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed by this effect. Luckily for this card, Blaze Accelerator Reload is treated as a Tri-Blaze Accelerator, so it is a special summon, which is pretty cool. And on top of that, it's got some pretty good battle effects, honestly. The first one has been a little bit outdated because your opponent essentially can manipulate the situation to their advantage on their turn. But for your turn at least, if you simply destroy one monster, meaning the one that you can destroy, then it's going to destroy all their monsters. So essentially, if your opponent has a bunch of annoying monsters that cannot be destroyed by battle, simply attack and destroy the one that can, and then all the others are gone, and you get to inflict a pretty good amount of burn damage for every single time this effect is used. So yeah, this is one that can sometimes be seen in some Volcanic decks at 1, but usually no more than that because it can get a little bit too cloggy, as you want to use your Blaze Accelerator Reload for other effects like Scattershot. Now we're going to move on to a few other spells and traps, being Wildfire, Volcanic Recharge, and just for shits and giggles, let's put Volcanic Eruption in there as well. Wildfire is a quick play spell card that says pay 500 life points, destroy a face-up Blaze Accelerator card you control, and destroy all monsters on the field. Then special summon one Wildfire token, Pyro type Fire level 3, attack 1000, defense 1000, in attack position. Also you cannot declare an attack this turn. Volcanic Recharge is a normal trap card that says return up to 3 Volcanic monster cards from your graveyard to your deck. And Volcanic Eruption is another normal trap card that says during your end phase, if you control Jurassic World, destroy all cards on the field. So let's start with this one first. So I was putting it in here just for fun, but obviously this card is not actually part of the Volcanic Archetype, so I just wanted to put that in here to clarify that it's not an actual Volcanic type, because in the OCG it doesn't have what equates to Volcanic in a card name. Volcanic Recharge is an incredibly underpowered card. I can see why this specific archetype would need to have a support card like this, because you do want to recycle your shells and scatter shots to be able to utilize them again, but there are just much better cards out there nowadays like Royal Firestorm Guards or Pot of Avarice, so yeah, just pass on this. And Wildfire is decent, I suppose. It's not horrible, but it's definitely not great. The effect would have been much better if you could at least still attack this turn, or at the very least do some kind of limitation like you cannot declare an attack this turn except Pyro monsters, or except Volcanic monsters. That would have made it a little bit more niche and specific in terms of utilization, but the fact that you cannot attack with anything, yeah, that's a little ridiculous. On top of that, that random pay 500 life points is just thrown in there too. Not that that's something that's breaking the card, it's not, but I'm just saying, just little things like that are a problem sometimes. Run one if you feel like it, otherwise you can skip it. Okay, and that is actually it for the entire archetype. As you can see, it's a little bit small, which means it does need some additional support. So let's talk about that support. As far as popular cards, a couple things that I've already been mentioning so many times. Royal Firestorm Guards and Pot of Avarice are very essential, at least Firestorm Guards. Pot of Avarice maybe not so much depending on the deck you're running, but these cards are going to be your main recyclers. Other cards that send cards to the graveyard such as Foolish Burial are also pretty good, as you want to have cards like Volcanic Counter in the graveyard. And other general support cards include Cataclysmic Scorching Sunburner, because this card actually is good for adding some additional burn damage to this fire archetype. Mystic Mind, because the majority of the time you're not going to be having a lot of monsters, especially not more than your opponent, because most of them are going to be in the graveyard a lot of the time, just essentially doing burn damage and killing opponents' monsters. So running 3 Mystic Minds actually is a pretty viable strategy. Obviously with that you want to run Terraforming, and a few other last resort cards to use could be Magic Planter, as it lets you send your reload to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. There can only be 1 to control the field a little bit better with types. And summon limit, because it does actually prevent your opponent from special summoning and swarming too much, because your deck with Volcanics is not really going to be overwhelmingly powerful with special summons. On top of that, all these last few cards that I mentioned are also good targets for Magic Planter if you are in a little bit of a pinch and need to draw some more cards. The extra deck can further be bolstered with general Ring 4 Xyz monsters, as you do have cards like Firestorm Guards and Volcanic Rocket, so if you can add a little bit of burn or general effects, like for example Castel, the Skyblaster Musketeer, or Gagaga Cowboy for that burn damage, your deck will also be a little bit more effective. And that is honestly about it. As you can see, the Volcanic Archetype is a little bit small, so you do have to be a little bit flexible in terms of adding other cards from other archetypes or series into this one, but ultimately it's a pretty decent archetype if you know how to play it effectively. It's very fun and it feels very passive on the surface, but it's actually incredibly engaging and active. So that is it for this archetype review. As always, leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you would like to see more of these, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye everyone, have a great and of course a fantastic day.